Dr. Kethvar had catalogued the death songs of 17 civilizations, translated the final transmissions of 63 extinct species, and memorized the collapse patterns of 41 different stellar empires. None of this prepared them for finding mythology that insisted on being historically accurate. The human data crystal sat innocuously among the debris field artifacts, just another relic from New Kenor's final evacuation. Kethvar's 4 eyes tracked the scrolling text, while their secondary brain processed linguistic patterns. Everything about this particular archive screamed academic fraud, except for the parts that corroborated classified military intelligence from 3 different galactic sectors. Assistant Veloth, Kethvar called across the sterile analysis chamber. Run another authentication scan on artifact NH7742. The younger Zilithian's crest feathers rustled with irritation. Professor, we've verified that crystal 6 times already. The molecular dating is consistent, the data corruption patterns match expected degradation, and the storage medium is definitely pre-contact era human technology. Then explain to me how a species that achieved faster-than-light travel only 4 centuries ago has detailed mythological accounts of the Andromedan border wars. Velit's feathers went completely flat. The what wars? Kethvar gestured toward the holographic display where human text floated in neat glowing columns. According to this folklore collection from New Kenor's cultural archives, humans have epic poems describing massive fleet engagements in the Andromedan spiral, battles involving hundreds of thousands of vessels, plasma bombardments of entire systems, and something called the Great Retreat that supposedly lasted 87 years. That's impossible. Veloth moved closer to examine the display. The Andromedan spiral wasn't even explored until the hegemony surveys 300 years ago, and the hegemony found no evidence of large-scale warfare in those systems. Exactly my point. Kethvar's manipulator arms danced across the interface, highlighting specific passages. Listen to this particular verse. Beyond the spiral's edge, where dark matter flows, the 13th Fleet made their final stand. Admiral Chen's gambit saved what Chen's pride had lost, trading 7,000 souls for 7 systems worth of time. Primitive poetry, Veloth dismissed. Humans love their dramatic military fantasies. Do they? Kethvar pulled up another file. Because Admiral Chen's tactical manual is sitting right here in the same archive, written by someone with an intimate understanding of gravitational warfare, quantum torpedo deployment, and multidimensional fleet coordination. The mathematical models alone would make our current military strategists weep with envy. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Veloth's crest began rising again, slowly, as the implications settled in. Professor, you're suggesting that human myths contain accurate descriptions of military campaigns that predate their known technological development by millennia? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Kethvar replied. I'm simply observing that either humans are the most imaginative species in galactic history, or we've fundamentally misunderstood something about their past. The analysis chamber's main door hissed open, admitting Dr. Quintal, the station's chief xenohistorian. The Vorthak's crystalline exoskeleton clinked softly as they approached the display. Kethvar, I received your preliminary report on the human artifacts. Quintal's voice resonated with harmonic undertones that suggested deep concern. Please tell me you haven't shared these findings with anyone outside this facility. Where would I? Kethvar stopped, studying their colleague's rigid posture. Quintal, what aren't you telling me? Pull up your human mythology file designated as the Siege of Proxima Station. Quintal commanded. Kethvar complied, and the hologram shifted to display what appeared to be an epic ballad, describing a massive space battle around a heavily fortified installation. Now, Quintal continued, access the classified hegemony archive, authorization level 7, regarding the Proxima incident. I don't have level 7. Use my codes. Quintal provided the access sequence. The secure files materialized alongside the human poetry. Velos made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. The classified military report described in clinical detail the same battle depicted in the human myth, same location, same tactical movements, same catastrophic casualties. The only difference was the date. The military files placed the battle 200 years before humans supposedly achieved interstellar flight. This is a clerical error, Veloth whispered. Someone mixed up the dates in the archive system. 23 separate incidents, Quintal said quietly. I've been cross-referencing human cultural materials with classified military histories for the past 6 months. Every single piece of their mythology that describes interstellar warfare corresponds to actual battles documented in our most sensitive archives. Kethvar felt their primary heart skip several beats. Are you telling me that human folklore is actually a historical record? I'm telling you that either every major galactic intelligence agency has been systematically doctoring historical documents for centuries, or humans have been fighting wars across the galaxy since before most of our species achieved spaceflight. The three researchers stared at the floating text, each line of human poetry now carrying the weight of terrible possibility. There's more, Quintal added. According to the patterns I've identified, humans didn't just participate in these conflicts. Based on the tactical descriptions and strategic outcomes detailed in their myths, they won most of them. But that would mean, Veloth's voice trailed off. Kethvar finished, that the most primitive species in known space is actually the most militarily successful civilization in galactic history. Quintal's exoskeleton darkened to a deep amber, the Vorthak equivalent of a grim smile. It would also mean they've been lying to everyone about it for 400 years. The analysis chamber seemed smaller suddenly, filled with the implications of their discovery. Outside the viewports, the dead world of New Kanao continued its silent orbit, keeping whatever secrets its evacuated inhabitants had left behind. We need to interview actual humans, Kethvar decided. Veterans, if any are still alive from the periods described in these accounts. Already arranged, Quintal replied. There's a human diplomatic station 3 sectors from here. They've agreed to let us speak with some of their elderly storytellers. Humans who apparently spend their time sharing old war stories that everyone assumes are fictional. Velos' feathers had gone completely pale. What if they're not fictional? Then, Kethvar said, powering down the holographic display, we're about to discover that the galaxy's understanding of its own history is fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. The human text faded from view, but its implications lingered in the chamber like the echo of distant gunfire. Somewhere in the depths of space, other archives waited with their own impossible stories, and the 3 researchers had just committed themselves to uncovering truths that might reshape everything they thought they knew about the civilization they lived in. As they prepared to leave for the human station, none of them noticed the small notation buried deep in the crystal's metadata. A timestamp indicating the file had been accessed and modified just once since its creation, exactly 6 months ago, precisely when Dr. Quintal had begun their classified research into human military history. Some discoveries, it seemed, were meant to be made right on schedule. The waiting area of Diplomatic Station Kepler smelled like synthetic coffee and old regrets. Kethvar had expected sleek human technology and carefully managed interactions. Instead, they found a converted cargo bay where elderly humans sat around scratched metal tables, apparently competing to see who could tell the most outrageous lies about their military service. So there I was, reactor core bleeding plasma like a stuck pig, declared a grizzled woman with silver hair and prosthetic eyes. 3 hegemony dreadnoughts bearing down on us, and Captain Morrison orders a hyperspace jump straight through the Cygnus anomaly. The other humans around her table groaned in unison. "Not the Cygnus story again, Lieutenant Blake," muttered a man whose uniform jacket bore insignia from at least 6 different military branches. "Tell them about the time you supposedly held off an entire Zilithian strike force with nothing but a maintenance drone and some spare conduit." Blake grinned, revealing teeth that had clearly been replaced multiple times. "That wasn't me, you senile old bastard. That was Sergeant Kim during the Vega uprising." Cathbar exchanged glances with Veloth and Quintal. These were the storytellers they'd come to interview. Humans who spent their retirement spinning tall tales that supposedly contained fragments of actual galactic history. "Excuse me," Kethvar interrupted politely. "Lieutenant Blake, you mentioned the Cygnus anomaly. Could you describe the hyperspace characteristics you observed there?" Blake's expression shifted, becoming suddenly sharp and professional. "Well now, that depends on whether you want the official version or what actually happened. We're interested in accuracy." "Accuracy?" Blake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The Cygnus anomaly generates localized gravitational distortions that compress hyperspace into stable corridors roughly 2.7 kilometers wide. Navigation requires constant recalibration because the gravity wells shift every 43 minutes in a pattern that follows the anomaly's rotation. Standard protocol says never attempt transit during a gravity flux, but Morrison calculated we could ride the edge of a wave if we aligned our exit vector with the anomaly's. Velas's feathers were standing straight up. The technical detail Blake had just recited matched classified hegemony navigational data that wasn't supposed to exist outside of military installations. "And this Captain Morrison," Quintal interjected carefully. "What was his full designation?" "Captain Elena Morrison, Commanding Officer, Earth Defense Force Cruiser Defiant. Registration EDC 2847. Blake rattled off without hesitation. "Died at the Battle Wolf 359, along with most of her crew. Hell of a tactician, though. Her maneuver through Cygnus bought the evacuation fleet enough time to reach the Sol defense perimeter." The multi-insignia veteran looked up from his drink. "You're talking to researchers, aren't you, Blake?" "Xenohistorians," Kethvar confirmed. "We're investigating certain inconsistencies in historical records." "Inconsistencies?" The veteran stood, extending a scarred hand. "Commander Jackson Reeves, retired. And let me guess, you found some of our old stories and noticed they match events that supposedly happened before we left Earth." "That's correct." Reeves gestured to the assembled humans. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have academics. Everyone remember the briefing protocols." A ripple of laughter went around the room, but Kethvar noticed it carried an edge of tension. "Briefing protocols?" Veloth asked. "A standard operating procedure when dealing with galactic historians," explained a woman wearing the faded uniform of what looked like an engineering corps. "Tell the truth, let them think we're delusional, and make sure they document everything properly." "Chief Engineer Martinez," she added, offering her own introduction. "I spent 30 years maintaining the hyperdrives on long-range reconnaissance vessels. Want to know why human engines are supposedly so primitive compared to everyone else's?" "Please," Quintal said. Martinez pulled out a battered tablet and began sketching. because we build them to specifications that don't officially exist. Take a standard hegemony hyperdrive. Elegant, efficient, works perfectly within established hyperspace physics. Now look at human designs. She showed them a schematic that made Kethvar's secondary brain ache, just trying to follow the dimensional mappings. Our drives incorporate technology for navigating hyperspace anomalies, temporal distortions, and gravitational warfare conditions that most species have never encountered. We over-engineer everything because we've been fighting in environments that would shred conventional vessels. But human technology is documented as being centuries behind galactic standards, Velos protested. Documented by whom? Reeves asked pointedly. Show me a single independent analysis of human military hardware that wasn't conducted under diplomatic protocols that strictly limited what we were allowed to demonstrate. Lake leaned forward across the table. You want to know the real joke? Every time we join one of your academic conferences or technology exchanges, we have to deliberately dumb down our contributions. Can't let anyone know that the primitive Earth fleet has been running quantum-encrypted communications networks since before the hegemony learned to spell encryption. A younger human whose uniform looked considerably newer than the others cleared his throat. Excuse me, sirs, but shouldn't we— Relax, Corporal. Reeves waved him off. These researchers have Level 7 access to hegemony archives. They've already seen enough classified material to get themselves executed for espionage in half the systems in this sector. Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. How do you know what clearance level we have? Same way we know you've been cross-refreshing our cultural archives with military incident reports, Martinez said casually. Same way we know exactly which battles you've identified, which tactical manuals you've accessed, and how many cups of Zilithian analysis stimulant young Velorth here has consumed while staying up all night, trying to make sense of the timeline discrepancies. The three researchers sat in stunned silence. You've been monitoring our investigation, Quintal stated. Monitoring, guiding, occasionally providing helpful nudges in the right direction, Blake confirmed. Did you really think it was coincidence that Dr. Quintal suddenly developed an interest in human folklore exactly 6 months ago? Or that the new Kanawa archives happened to contain such perfectly preserved examples of our mythology? Commander Reeves settled back into his chair with the satisfied expression of someone about to deliver a punchline that had been centuries in the making. The thing about academic researchers, he said, is that they always think they're discovering secrets, but sometimes the secrets have been waiting patiently for them to be smart enough to find the clues that were left deliberately lying around. Outside the observation windows, stars wheeled in patterns that looked suddenly less random and more like the carefully planned positions of a very long, very patient game. Well? Kethvar asked quietly. Martinez smiled, and for the first time since they'd arrived, it looked genuinely warm instead of predatory. Because it's time for you to learn what really happened during the last 400 years of galactic history, and more importantly, why we let everyone else think they were writing it. The secure briefing room felt smaller than a coffin and twice as quiet. Ambassador Chen, no relation to the admiral from the myths, she'd assured them with suspicious emphasis, sat across from the three researchers, with the patient demeanor of someone about to explain why the sky wasn't actually blue. Behind her, holographic star charts filled the walls, showing galactic sectors in configurations that violated every treaty Kethvar had memorized during their diplomatic training. The Terran Colonial Authority formally dissolved in 2387. Ambassador Chen began without preamble. What most species don't realize is that we didn't disband our military structure. We simply stopped advertising its existence." "That's impossible," Veloth interrupted. "The integration accords require full disclosure of military capabilities from all member species." "The integration accords," Chen replied, "were drafted by species who assumed Earth's representatives were negotiating from a position of weakness." She gestured, and the star charts shifted to show force deployment patterns that made Kethvar's estimation algorithms crash spectacularly. At the time of integration, human naval assets included approximately 4 million combat vessels, distributed across 237 star systems. We had established permanent military installations in sectors that your government still consider unexplored territory. Quintal's crystalline structure had shifted to a deep red, the Vorthak equivalent of barely controlled panic. 4 million ships? The entire hegemony battle fleet numbers less than 50,000 vessels? "Exactly," Chen said, "which is why we made a strategic decision to hide our actual strength behind a facade of primitive technology and recent spaceflight development." The wall displays changed again, showing what appeared to be Earth's solar system, except instead of the sparse orbital facilities described in official records, it bristled with defensive installations that could have held off an invasion by every known military force combined. "The Sol Defense Grid," Chen explained, "has been operational for over 6 centuries. Lunar Base houses our primary military academy, where we've been training officers in advanced stellar combat since before most of your species achieved fusion power." "But the archaeological evidence," Kethvar protested weakly, "the historical records of early human development." "Were meticulously fabricated," Chen interrupted. "Every ancient artifact, every primitive technology demonstration, every carefully leaked piece of intelligence about our supposedly limited capabilities, all part of the longest-running deception campaign in galactic history." Ambassador Chen stood and walked to a section of the wall that displayed what looked like a standard galactic political map. At her touch, it transformed into something that made all 3 researchers question their understanding of basic geometry. "This is the actual power structure of known space," she said. "The territories you think belong to the hegemony, the Zilithian Republic, the Vorthak Collective, they exist because we allow them to exist. Every independent government operates within parameters we established and continue to enforce." The map showed invisible boundaries, patrol routes, and enforcement zones that carve the galaxy into sections managed by what could only be described as a shadow administration. "The Andromedan border wars," Chen continued, "weren't mythological. They were the final phase of our expansion into what you now call the Outer Territories. We won those campaigns so decisively that surviving enemy forces fled beyond the galactic rim." "Then why?" Quintal asked in a voice like breaking glass. "Why maintain the deception?" Chen's expression softened slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine sadness. "Because we learned something during those early expansion wars that none of your species have discovered yet. Absolute military dominance doesn't create lasting peace. It creates resentment, rebellion, and eventual catastrophic conflict." The displays shifted once more, showing historical patterns of empire collapse, species extinction, and civilizational suicide that followed predictable cycles across dozens of previous galactic configurations. Every time a single species achieves total dominance, the result is the same. Everyone else eventually unites against them, leading to wars that consume entire sectors and leave whole regions uninhabitable for millennia. "So you decided to pretend to be weak," Veloth said, understanding beginning to dawn in their voice. "We decided to be invisible," Chen corrected, "to create a galactic civilization where multiple species believe they share power, make their own decisions, and control their own destinies. The hegemony thinks it maintains order through diplomacy. The Zilithian Republic believes its economic policies drive interstellar trade. The Vorthak Collective assumes its technological innovations advance galactic science. But actually, Kethvar began, we've been managing all of those systems from behind the scenes for 4 centuries, Chen finished. Every major diplomatic breakthrough, every crucial technological advance, every economic policy that prevented resource wars, they all originated from carefully placed suggestions, strategic intelligence leaks, and occasionally some very subtle military pressure applied in ways that looked like accidents or natural phenomena. The room felt like it was spinning, though Kethvar knew the station's artificial gravity remained perfectly stable. The peace you've all been living in, Chen continued, the unprecedented cooperation between species, the longest period of galactic stability in recorded history, it exists because humans have been working constantly to maintain it. While letting everyone else take credit, Quintal observed. Especially that, Chan agreed. Pride is the most dangerous force in the universe. Give a species something to be proud of, and they'll fight to defend it. Make them feel like they earned their achievements through their own efforts, and they'll work to preserve the conditions that allowed those achievements to happen. Ambassador Chen touched the wall display one final time, and it returned to showing the familiar political boundaries that the 3 researchers had grown up believing represented reality. The joke, she said, is that it's worked better than we ever imagined. The current galactic civilization is more stable, more prosperous, and more genuinely cooperative than anything we could have imposed through direct rule. But now you're telling us the truth, Valoff pointed out. Chen smiled, and for the first time since they'd entered the briefing room, it looked entirely human. Warm, slightly mischievous, and completely terrifying in its implications. Now we're telling you the truth, because after 400 years of careful management, we think the galactic community is finally mature enough to handle, knowing that their protective older siblings have been watching over them the entire time. And if we're wrong about that maturity level, Kethvar asked. Chen's smile widened. Then you'll discover that human military capabilities have improved considerably since the Andromedan campaigns. 6 months later, Dr. Kethvar stood before the assembled Galactic Historical Society, staring at an audience that included representatives from every major species in known space. The presentation chamber buzzed with nervous energy as academics, diplomats, and military observers waited to hear findings that would fundamentally reshape their understanding of the universe they inhabited. Colleagues, Kethvar began, today we must confront the uncomfortable reality that our entire historical framework has been constructed around a deliberate omission. The hegemony delegation shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Several Zilithian observers had their crest feathers locked in positions that suggested barely controlled hostility. The Vorthak representatives sat motionless, their crystalline forms reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that spoke of deep analytical processing. Over the past standard year, our research team has compiled evidence demonstrating that human civilization has been significantly more advanced and militarily capable than previously documented. Furthermore, we have confirmed that this disparity was maintained through conscious policy decisions rather than historical accident. Chancellor Murthak of the Hegemony Council rose from his seat. Dr. Kethvar, are you suggesting that humans have been deceiving the galactic community about their technological development? I'm suggesting, Chancellor, that humans engineered the current galactic political structure while allowing other species to believe they created it themselves. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, protests and demands for clarification. Kethvar waited for the noise to subside before continuing. The evidence is overwhelming. Human mythology contains accurate tactical descriptions of military campaigns that establish the territorial boundaries we currently recognize. Their primitive technology incorporates design principles that surpass current galactic standards. Most significantly, every major diplomatic breakthrough of the past 4 centuries can be traced to human influence operating through intermediary channels. Director Sakara of Orthac Intelligence spoke in harmonics that carried across the chamber despite their low volume. "You're describing a shadow government spanning multiple star systems." "I'm describing a species that chose invisible guidance over visible dominance," Kethvar corrected. "The question we must now address is how this revelation affects our future relationships and policy decisions." Ambassador Chen entered the chamber at that moment, her timing so perfect it could only have been calculated. She walked to the center of the speaking floor with the casual confidence of someone who had been expecting this conversation for decades. "Honored delegates," she said, "I believe I can provide some context for Dr. Keffar's research." "You knew," Chancellor Murthak accused. "You knew we would eventually discover your deception?" "We planned for you to discover it," Chen replied calmly. "Every piece of evidence Dr. Kethvar uncovered was placed where scholarly investigation would eventually find it. The timeline of revelation was carefully calibrated to coincide with what our sociological models predicted would be optimal readiness levels across all major species." The chamber fell silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to quiet, as if the station itself was listening. "The deception," Chen continued, "was never meant to be permanent. It was a transitional strategy, designed to allow galactic civilization to mature to the point where multiple species could coexist without constant warfare or the need for direct imperial oversight." Elder Jorak of the Zilithian Republic, whose feathers had turned the pale blue of deep contemplation, spoke carefully. "You've been parenting us. We've been protecting you from the same mistakes that destroyed previous galactic civilizations," Chen confirmed. "The archaeological record shows 17 different multi-species societies that collapsed into genocidal wars because one group achieved overwhelming technological or military superiority. We chose a different approach." Dr. Veloth, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally stood to address the assembly. "The research data confirms that current territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and diplomatic protocols all align with strategic frameworks that appear in human military planning documents dating back 6 centuries. What we interpreted as natural political evolution was actually careful cultivation. But the economic policies that enabled our current prosperity," Director Sakara began, "were suggested by human economic advisors operating under assumed identities within your financial institutions," Chen finished. "The technological advances that revolutionized interstellar travel were reverse-engineered from human designs leaked through academic exchange programs. The diplomatic frameworks that ended the sectoral conflicts were adapted from human negotiation strategies tested in smaller-scale disputes." Chancellor Murthak's expression had shifted from anger to something approaching wonder. "How many of our achievements are actually our own?" "All of them," Chen replied, surprising everyone in the chamber. "Every breakthrough, every success, every moment of genuine cooperation. Those happened because your species were capable of recognizing good ideas and implementing them effectively. We provided opportunities and suggestions, but the actual work of building this civilization was accomplished by your governments, your scientists, your diplomats, and your citizens." "So what happens now?" Elder Jorak asked. "Do you reveal your true military strength and assume direct control?" Chen laughed, and the sound carried genuine amusement rather than mockery. "Quite the opposite. Now that galactic civilization has demonstrated its stability and maturity, we're gradually withdrawing from active management. The training wheels are coming off. Training wheels, Kethvar repeated. A human metaphor, Chen explained. Small stabilizing devices, used to help children learn to ride vehicles before they develop sufficient balance and coordination to operate them independently. The chamber digested this information with varying degrees of comprehension and unease. Over the next century, Chen continued, you'll notice human involvement in galactic affairs becoming increasingly minimal. We'll maintain our diplomatic presence and honor our treaty obligations, but the shadow networks, the strategic guidance systems, and the invisible security apparatus that have been operating for 400 years will be systematically deactivated. And if we make mistakes? Director Sakara inquired. If the stability you've maintained begins to collapse? Chen's expression grew serious. Then you'll learn from those mistakes and develop better solutions. Just like every other species that successfully transitions from adolescence to maturity. We have confidence in your ability to handle whatever challenges arise. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives who were still processing the magnitude of what they'd learned. The greatest compliment we can pay to your civilizations is trusting you to manage your own affairs without constant supervision. Today marks the beginning of that trust. As Ambassador Chen left the chamber, Dr. Kethvar realized that their discovery had been the final examination in a course none of them had known they were taking. They had spent months uncovering evidence of human deception, only to learn that the greatest deception had been allowing them to believe they were discovering secrets rather than being carefully educated about their own history. The galaxy's newest chapter was beginning, and for the first time in 4 centuries, no one knew exactly how the story would end. Which was, Kethvar reflected, probably exactly what the humans had intended all along.